Hello everyone, welcome to Literature Camp, a channel for the preparation of UGC NET and set in English literature. I am Divargo Chakraborty. This is my second class on literary theory. The topic of our today's discussion is new criticism. So be ready with a pen and paper and start making notes. I hope you will make notes of all the points I'm going to give today. So let's start this class. What is new criticism? New criticism is a formalist movement. Is a formalist movement in literary theory which dominated in American literary criticism in the mid 20th century. Yes, in mid 20th century. They primarily emphasized on the close reading of the text, particularly of poetry. So, new critics, they believe that a work of literature should be viewed as a self-contented and self-referential entity. A poem should not mean but be. Yes, that is the question that we need to remember. It's a poem should not mean but be, and that the meaning of the text can be discovered through careful examination of its language, structure, and the imagery in the text. Yes, try to understand. It's a part of formalism. It's a part of formalism. In my previous class, I have discussed formalism very carefully, right? So, new criticism is a formalist movement. Their focus is on language, careful examination of its language of the text, structure, and imagery of the text. This movement derived its name from John Crowe Ransom's very famous work, The New Criticism. Yes, this is something that you need to recall, right? The New Criticism, published in 1941. You need to remember the publication year. This is very important. So now we should know the important works written by J.C. Ransom. He is very important figure in this field. You can very well understand. First of all, he is the editor of Kenyan Review. This is a journal, and definitely this question can come. Editor, let me write it down. Editor of Kenyan Review. This is something very much important that you need to recall. J.C. Ransom is the editor of Kenyan Review. He has written many important works. Any question can come from his work. Number one work, The New Criticism, published in 1941. Again, this theory, New Criticism, the name is derived from this work of J.C. Ransom. The name of the work is The New Criticism, published in 1941, right? Next work is Criticism in, published in 1937. Again, we need to recall this name. Next work, The Ontological Critic, very much important. Simply a question can come, who wrote The Ontological Critic? Simply can come. Next work, Chills and Fever. It's a poem. All right. So these are all important works written by J.C. Ransom. We need to remember. Next, there are some groups. There are some groups we need to know. Southern critics. They're all part of new criticism. Let me tell you. They're called Southern critics. Who are they? We need to remember all the names. All the names. Again, Ransom is there. Alan Tate, again, who has coined the term tension, right? So Alan Tate, Cleanth Brooks, very much important figure, and Robert Penn Warren. They are called Southern critics. Simply, a question can come: who is not Southern critics? Right? They will give 4 options. You need to pick one out. So you need to remember all the names who are associated with this book. Southern critics, J.C. Ransom, Alan Tate, Cleanth Brooks, and R.P. Warren. They are called Southern critics. Next, Chicago critics. As I've told you already, these are all groups of new critics, Chicago critics. It is also called Neo-Aristotelianism. Yes, simply a question can come. Which group is called Neo-Aristotelianism? So, Chicago critic, due to its strong emphasis on Aristotle's concept of plot, character, and genre. So, Chicago critics, they're called Neo-Aristotelianism. Again, this name, Chicago critics, this group actually is founded by none other than R.S. Crane. So, who has founded? He's a founder member of this group. The name is R.S. Crane, right? R.S. Crane, who has founded this group, Chicago Critics. Now we should know some important works written by R.S. Crane. Number one, Critics and Criticism, published in 1952, written by Crane. Next work, The Languages of Criticism and Structure of Poetry, published in 1953. Who wrote it? R.S. Crane. Very much important. Next work, which also contributed in this group, is Booth's Rhetoric of Fiction. Simply they can ask who wrote the Rhetoric of Fiction. The answer is Booth. Booth also wrote another work, a Rhetoric of Irony. Yes, this question also can come. A Rhetoric of Irony. Who wrote it? This is written by Booth. So I hope you have understood Chicago Critics. This group is founded by R.S. Crane, who has written these works, and Booth also contributed this work in this group, The Rhetoric of Fiction. One more information that you need to remember is W.K. Wimsatt. I hope you have heard his name. Wimsatt wrote an essay. The title of the essay is Chicago Critics. Chicago Critics. So simply a question can come. Who wrote an essay called Chicago Critics? So the answer is Wimsatt. Wimsatt wrote Chicago Critics. Please make a note of this. This is very important. Now I hope you have written down all the points. Now new critics, particularly you need to remember these three names. They are particularly called new critics. I. Richard, very important person, very important figure in this group. William Empson, yes, again, and R.P. Warren. R.P. Warren. These are three members which are called new critics. Simply again, they can ask any name who is not in the list. Again, you need to remember all the names. I. Richard, William Empson, and R.P. Warren. They are called basically new critics. Now we should know some important works written by these three writers. They are very much important. They can come anytime. So I. Richard, right now. I. Richard wrote, the first work is The Meaning of Meaning. Very important. A study of influence of language upon thought and of the science of symbolism, published in 1923. This work is written with C.K. Ogden. So please make a note of this. This is something very much important. Who wrote The Meaning of Meaning? So the answer is R. Richard with C.K. Ogden, right? They can also ask the subtitle as well. So you need to remember the entire title. Next, The Principles of Literary Criticism. Remember the name. This is very important. Published in 1924. Principles of Literary Criticism. Who wrote Practical Criticism? The answer is R.A. Richard. How much important? Perhaps you may not understand right now. When these names will be asked in question paper, you'll find them. You'll find them. So, Practical Criticism, 1929. And the final work, A Philosophy of Rhetoric, published in 1936. Try to remember the publication year as well. They can ask the chronological order as well. So, meaning, then Principles of Literary Criticism, published in 1924, then Practical Criticism, published in 1929, then A Philosophy of Rhetoric, published in 1936. So these are important works written by R.A. Richard. Next, we should know some important works written by Sir William Empson, right? William Empson is famous for this work, Seven Types of Ambiguity, published in 1930. This is very important, seven types of ambiguity. You can also read what are the seven types of ambiguities are there in the word from the Google. You can read if you want to read Seven Types of Ambiguity, written by Sir William Empson, published in 1930. Next work is The Gathering Storm, published in 1940. It's a poetry collection. It's a poetry collection. All right. The Gathering Storm. Next work, The Structure of Complex Words. Many times this question came already, so you should remember, published in 1951. The Structure of Complex Words. Next work, Milton's God. Who wrote Milton's God? So this is Empson, published in 1961. The Face of Buddha. The Face of Buddha. Next work is Using Biography. Using Biography is again very much important work that you should remember. Next work, next writer we should read well, that is R.P. Warren. Again, this writer is very much important. You should recall, should remember. R.P. Warren is the editor of Southern Review. So, editor of Southern Review. Please make a note of this. This is something very important. His first work, The Night Rider. It's a novel published in 1939. All right. Next work, At Heaven's Gate, published in 1943. These are basically novels. All the King's Men, published in 1946. This work is very famous, and he got Pulitzer Prize for writing this. Pulitzer Prize for writing this novel, All the King's Men. Next work, it's a novel as well, Bond of Angels. Next work, The Circus in the Attic and Other Stories. It's a collection of short stories. Next work is again very much important, Who Speaks for the Negro. Simply they can ask who wrote Who Speaks for the Negro. The answer is R.P. Warren, published in 1965. Right. Next work, Pure and Impure Poetry. Again, very important work, Pure and Impure Poetry, written by R.P. Warren. Next work, An Approach to Literature. This is also written by R.P. Warren with Cleanth Brooks. All right. So please make a note of these important works written by R.P. Warren. Any question can come from these works. Right. Next work, next writer you should read is Cleanth Brooks. Very important writer. First work published in 1938, Understanding Poetry. It is written with R.P. Warren. All right. So understanding poetry written by Cleanth Brooks with R.P. Warren. Next work, modern poetry and tradition. Very much important work. Please try to remember the name of this work, published in 1939. Modern poetry and tradition. Simply they can ask who wrote modern poetry and tradition. The answer is Cleanth Brooks. Next work is understanding fiction, published in 1943. It is again with uh, written with R.P. Warren. All right. So understanding fiction. This is something very important. Next work, the well-written. This is very significant work and very important work. The subtitle is also can be asked. Studies in the structure of poetry. The well-written, published in 1947. Try to remember the publication year as well. The well-written, the subtitle is structures in studies in the structures of poetry, published in 1947. The title of these work is taken from a famous poem written by John Donne, The Canonization. The title is taken from John Donne's The Canonization. All right. It's a very famous poem. I hope you have read this poem, right? So the title of this work is taken from John Donne's poem, The Canonization. And again, this book is about the close reading. Yes, that is the fundamental purpose of new critics. Close reading, right? So close reading of poems by John Donne, Shakespeare, Milton, Alexander Pope, William Wordsworth, Keats, Lord Tennyson, Yeats, Thomas Gray, and T.S. Eliot. Yes, they can simply ask who are the writers referred in this work. So you need to remember all the writers referred to this work, right? So these are the references, very significant references, right? So this book is about the close reading of the poems by John Donne, William Shakespeare, Milton, Pope, Wordsworth, Keats, Tennyson, Yeats, Thomas Gray, and T.S. Eliot, right? So please make a note of this. This is something very important. Again, in well-written, the theory illuminates practice and vice versa. Poems are meant to be concrete examples on which generalizations are to be based on. Thus, the first chapter tells us the title, poetic language is the language of paradox. So that is the first chapter, right? The language of paradox. Definitely, it can be also asked. What is the name of the first chapter? The language of paradox, right? So, well written. You should remember studies in structure of poetry, published in 1947. Next, there are some works we also need to remember. In 1964, published in 1964, The Hidden God, very much important. That is the subtitle. Studies in Hemingway, Faulkner, Yeats, and Warren. Simply, this question can be asked: who wrote Hidden God? Studies in Hemingway, Faulkner, Yeats, Eliot, and Warren. The answer is Cleanth Brooks, right? Next work, Escaping Joy. Studies in the Writer's Craft, written by Cleanth Brooks. Again, this is something we need to remember. Very much important work. Next work, published in 1995, Community, Religion, and Literature. Simply, they can ask who wrote Community, Religion, and Literature. Answer is Cleanth Brooks. So these are all important works written by Cleanth Brooks. I hope you have written down all the points. If you have any query, you can simply comment. Please check out the playlist I have made on literary theory for the purpose of UGC NET examination in English literature. So that is all about my today's class. Thanks for watching.